Chapter 4. Sharply the menacing wind sweeps over the bending poplars, newly bare. As a matter of fact, though, there was not a breath of wind that afternoon. It was almost as mild as spring. Gordon repeated to himself the poem he had begun yesterday, in a cadenced whisper, simply for the pleasure of the sound of it. He was pleased with the poem at this moment. It was a good poem, or would be when it was finished, anyway. He had forgotten that last night it had almost made him sick. The plane trees brooded motionless, dimmed by faint wreaths of mist. A tram boomed in the valley far below. Gordon walked up Malkin Hill, rustling in step deep through the dry, drifted leaves. All down the pavement they were strewn, crinkly and golden, like the rustling flakes of some American breakfast cereal, as though the Queen of Brobdingnag had upset her packet of true-weight breakfast crisps down the hillside.
Jolly, the windless winter days!
Best time of all the year, or so Gordon thought at this moment. He was as happy as you can be when you haven't smoked all day and have only 3 halfpence and a joey in the world. This was Thursday, early, closing day and Gordon's afternoon off. He was going to the house of Paul Doring, the critic who lived in Coleridge Grove and gave literary tea parties. It had taken him an hour or more to get himself ready. Social life is so complicated when your income is £2 a week. He had had a painful shave in cold water immediately after dinner. He had put on his best suit, 3 years old, but just passable when he remembered to press the trousers under his mattress. He had turned his collar inside out and tied his tie so that the torn place didn't show. With the point of a match, he had scraped enough blacking from the tin to polish his shoes. He had even borrowed a needle from Laurenheim and darned his socks, a tedious job, but better than inking the places where your ankle shows through. Also, he had procured an empty gold flake packet and put into it a single cigarette extracted from the penny, in the slot machine. That was just for the look of the thing. You can't, of course, go to other people's houses with no cigarettes. But if you have even one, it's all right. Because when people see 1 cigarette in a packet, they assume that the packet has been full. It is fairly easy to pass the thing off as an accident. Have a cigarette, you say casually to someone. Oh, thanks. You push the packet open and then register surprise. Al, I'm down to my last, and I could have sworn I had a full packet. Oh, I won't take your last. Have one of mine? Says the other. Oh, thanks. And after that, of course, your host and hostess press cigarettes upon you. But you must have 1 cigarette, just for honor's sake. Sharply, the menacing wind sweeps over. He would finish that poem presently. He could finish it whenever he chose. It was queer how the mere prospect of going to a literary tea party bucked him up. When your income is £2 a week, you at least aren't jaded by too much human contact. Even to see the inside of somebody else's house is a kind of treat. A padded armchair under your bum, and tea and cigarettes and the smell of women. You learn to appreciate such things when you are starved of them. In practice, though, Doring's parties never in the least resembled what Gordon looked forward to. Those wonderful, witty, erudite conversations that he imagined beforehand, they never happened or began to happen. Indeed, there was never anything that could properly be called conversation at all. Only the stupid clacking that goes on at parties everywhere. In Hampstead or Hong Kong, no one really worth meeting ever came to Doring's parties. Doring was such a very mangy lion himself that his followers were hardly even worthy to be called jackals. Quite half of them were those witted middle-aged women who have lately escaped from good Christian homes and are trying to be literary. The star exhibits were troops of bright young things who dropped in for half an hour, formed circles of their own, and talked sniggeringly about the other bright young things to whom they referred by nicknames. For the most part, Gordon found himself hanging about on the edges of conversations. Doring was kind in a slapdash way and introduced him to everybody as Gordon Comstock. You know, the poet. He wrote that dashed clever book of poems called Mice. You know, but Gordon had never yet encountered anybody who did know. The bright young things summed him up at a glance and ignored him. He was 30-ish, moth-eaten and obviously penniless. And yet, in spite of the invariable disappointment, how eagerly he looked forward to those literary tea parties. They were a break in his loneliness, anyway. That is the devilish thing about poverty, the ever-recurrent thing, loneliness. Day after day with never an intelligent person to talk to, night after night back to your godless room, always alone. Perhaps it sounds rather fun if you are rich and sought after, but how different it is when you do it from necessity. Sharply the menacing wind sweeps over. A stream of cars hummed easily up the hill. Gordon eyed them without envy. Who wants a car, anyway? The pink doll faces of upper-class women gazed at him through the car window. Bloody knit, witted lapdogs. Pampered bitches duzzing on their chains. Better the lone wolf than the cringing dogs. He thought of the tube stations at early morning. The black hordes of clerks scurrying underground like ants into a hole, swarms of little ant, like men, each with dispatch case in right hand, newspaper in left hand, and the fear of the sack like a maggot in his heart. How it eats at them, that secret fear, especially on winter days, when they hear the menace of the wind. Winter, the sack, the workhouse, the embankment benches. Ah! Sharply the menacing wind sweeps over the bending poplars, newly bare, and the dark ribbons of the chimneys veer downward, flicked by whips of air. Torn posters flutter, coldly sound the boom of trains and the rattle of hooves. And the clerks who hurry to the station look, shuddering over the eastern roofs, thinking, what do they think? Winter's coming. Is my job safe? The sack means the workhouse. Circumcise ye your foreskins, saith the Lord. Suck the blacking off the boss's boots.
Yes! Thinking each one, here comes the winter. Please God, I keep my job this year.
And bleakly, as the cold strikes through their entrails like an icy spear, they think again. No matter. What do they think? Money, money, money. Rent, rates, taxes, school bills, season tickets, boots for the children, and the life insurance policy and the skivvy's wages.
And my God, suppose the wife gets in the family way again.
And did I laugh loud enough when the boss made that joke yesterday? And the next installment on the vacuum cleaner. Neatly, taking a pleasure in his neatness, with the sensation of dropping piece after piece of a jigsaw puzzle into place, he fashioned another stanza. They think of rent, rates, season tickets, insurance, coal, the skivvy's wages, boots, school bills, and the next installment upon the 2 twin beds from Drage's. Not bad at all. Finish it presently. 4 or 5 more stanzas. Ravelston would print it. A starling sat in the naked boughs of a plane tree, crooning self, pitifully as starlings do on warm winter days when they believe spring is in the air. At the foot of the tree a huge sandy cat sat motionless, mouth open, gazing upwards with rapt desire, plainly expecting that the starling would drop into its mouth. Gordon repeated to himself the 4 finished stanzas of his poem. It was good. Why had he thought last night that it was mechanical, weak, and empty? He was a poet. He walked more upright, arrogantly almost, with the pride of a poet. Gordon Comstock, author of Mice, of exceptional promise, the Times lit. Sup, had said. Author also of London Pleasures. For that too would be finished quite soon. He knew now that he could finish it when he chose. Why had he ever despaired of it? 3 months it might take, soon enough to come out in the summer. In his mind's eye, he saw the slim, white buckram shape of London Pleasures, the excellent paper, the wide margins, the good Caslon type, the refined dust jacket, and the reviews in all the best papers. An outstanding achievement, the Times lit. Sup. A welcome relief from the Sitwell School scrutiny. Coleridge Grove was a damp, shadowy, secluded road, a blind alley and therefore void of traffic. Literary associations of the wrong kind as Coleridge was rumored to have lived there for 6 weeks in the summer of 1821, hung heavy upon it. You could not look at its antique, decaying houses, standing back from the road in dank gardens under heavy trees, without feeling an atmosphere of outmoded culture envelop you. In some of those houses, undoubtedly, Browning societies still flourished, and ladies in art surge sat at the feet of extinct poets talking about Swinburne and Walter Pater. In spring the gardens were sprinkled with purple and yellow crocuses, and later with harebells, springing up in little windy rings among the anemic grass. And even the trees, it seemed to Gordon, played up to their environment and twisted themselves into whimsy-Rackhamesque attitudes. It was queer that a prosperous hack critic like Paul Doring should live in such a place, for Doring was an astonishingly bad critic. He reviewed novels for the Sunday Post and discovered the great English novel with Walpolean regularity once a fortnight. You would have expected him to live in a flat on Hyde Park Corner. Perhaps it was a kind of penance that he had imposed upon himself, as though by living in the refined discomfort of Coleridge Grove, he propitiated the injured gods of literature. Gordon came round the corner, turning over in his mind a line from London Pleasures. And then suddenly he stopped short. There was something wrong about the look of the Dorings' gate. What was it? Oh, of course. There were no cars waiting outside. He paused, walked on a step or two, and stopped again, like a dog that smells danger. It was all wrong. There ought to be some cars. There were always quite a lot of people at the Dorings' parties, and half of them came in cars. Why had nobody else arrived? Could he be too early? But no, they had said 3:30, and it was at least 20 to 4. He hastened towards the gate. Already he felt practically sure that the party had been put off. A chill like the shadow of a cloud had fallen across him. Suppose the Dorings weren't at home? Suppose the party had been put off? And this thought, though it dismayed him, did not strike him as in the least improbable. It was his special bugbear, the especial childish dread he carried about with him, to be invited to people's houses and then find them not at home. Even when there was no doubt about the invitation, he always half expected that there would be some hitch or other. He was never quite certain of his welcome. He took it for granted that people would snub him and forget about him. Why not indeed? He had no money. When you have no money, your life is one long series of snubs. He swung the iron gate open. It creaked with a lonely sound. The dank mossy path was bordered with chunks of some Rackhamesque, pinkish stone. Gordon inspected the house front narrowly. He was so used to this kind of thing. He had developed a sort of Sherlock Holmes technique for finding out whether a house was inhabited or not. Not much doubt about it this time. The house had a deserted look, no smoke coming from the chimneys, no windows lighted. It must be getting darkish indoors. Surely they would have lighted the lamps. And there was not a single footmark on the steps. That settled it. Nevertheless, with a sort of desperate hope, he tugged at the bell. An old-fashioned wire bell, of course. In Coleridge Grove it would have been considered low and unliterary to have an electric bell. Clang, 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 went the bell. Gordon's last hope vanished. No mistaking the hollow clangor of a bell echoing through an empty house. He seized the handle again and gave it a wrench that almost broke the wire. A frightful, clamorous peal answered him. But it was useless, quite useless. Not a foot stirred within. Even the servants were out. At this moment, he became aware of a lace cap, some dark hair, and a pair of youthful eyes regarding him furtively from the basement of the house next door. It was a servant girl who had come out to see what all the noise was about. She caught his eye and gazed into the middle distance. He looked a fool and knew it. One always does look a fool when one rings the bell of an empty house. And suddenly, it came to him that that girl knew all about him, knew that the party had been put off, and that everyone except Gordon had been told of it. Knew that it was because he had no money that he wasn't worth the trouble of telling. She knew. Servants always know. He turned and made for the gate. Under the servant's eye, he had to stroll casually away, as though this were a small disappointment that scarcely mattered. But he was trembling so with anger that it was difficult to control his movements. The sods! The bloody sods! To have played a trick like that on him! To have invited him and then changed the day and not even bothered to tell him. There might be other explanations. He just refused to think of them. The sods! The bloody sods! His eye fell upon one of the Rackhamesque chunks of stone. How he'd love to pick that thing up and bash it through the window. He grasped the rusty gate bar so hard that he hurt his hand and almost tore it. The physical pain did him good. It counteracted the agony at his heart. It was not merely that he had been cheated of an evening spent in human company, though that was much. It was the feeling of helplessness, of insignificance, of being set aside. Ignored, a creature not worth worrying about. They'd changed the day and hadn't even bothered to tell him. Told everybody else, but not him.
That's how people treat you when you've no money!
Just wantonly, cold-bloodedly insult you. It was likely enough, indeed, that the Dorings had honestly forgotten, meaning no harm. It was even possible that he himself had mistaken the date. But no, he wouldn't think of it. The Dorings had done it on purpose. Of course they had done it on purpose, just hadn't troubled to tell him, because he had no money and consequently didn't matter.
The sods!
He walked rapidly away. There was a sharp pain in his breast. Human contact, human voices. But what was the good of wishing? He'd have to spend the evening alone, as usual. His friends were so few and lived so far away. Rosemary would still be at work. Besides, she lived at the back of Beyond, in West Kensington, in a women's hostel guarded by female dragons. Ravelston lived nearer, in the Regent's Park district. But Ravelston was a rich man and had many engagements. The chances were always against his being at home. Gordon could not even ring him up, because he hadn't the necessary 2 pennies, only 3 halfpence and the joey. Besides, how could he go and see Ravelston when he had no money? Ravelston would be sure to say, "Let's go to a pub," or something. He couldn't let Ravelston pay for his drinks. His friendship with Ravelston was only possible on the understanding that he paid his share of everything. He took out his single cigarette and lighted it. It gave him no pleasure to smoke. Walking fast, it was a mere reckless gesture. He did not take much notice of where he was going. All he wanted was to tire himself, to walk and walk till the stupid physical fatigue had obliterated the Doring snub. He moved roughly southward, through the wastes of Camden Town, down Tottenham Court Road. It had been dark for some time now. He crossed Oxford Street, threaded through Covent Garden, found himself in the Strand, and crossed the river by Waterloo Bridge. With night the cold had descended. As he walked his anger grew less violent. But his mood could not fundamentally improve. There was a thought that kept haunting him, a thought from which he fled, but which was not to be escaped. It was the thought of his poems. His empty, silly, futile poems. How could he ever have believed in them? To think that actually he had imagined, so short a time ago, that even London pleasures might one day come to something. It made him sick to think of his poems now. It was like remembering last night's debauch. He knew in his bones that he was no good and his poems were no good. London pleasures would never be finished. If he lived to be 1,000, he would never write a line worth reading. Over and over, in self-hatred, he repeated those 4 stanzas of the poem he had been making up. Christ, what tripe! Rhyme to rhyme, tinkle, 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 hollow as an empty biscuit tin. That was the kind of muck he had wasted his life on. He had walked a long way, 5 or 7 miles perhaps. His feet were hot and swollen from the pavements. He was somewhere in Lambeth, in a slummy quarter where the narrow, puddled street plunged into blackness at 50 yards distance. The few lamps, mist-ringed, hung like isolated stars, illumining nothing save themselves. He was getting devilishly hungry. The coffee shops tempted him with their steamy windows and their chalked signs, good cup of tea, 20, no urns used. But it was no use. He couldn't spend his joey. He went under some echoing railway arches and up the alley on to Hungerford Bridge. On the merry water, lit by the glare of sky signs, the muck of East London was racing inland. Corks, lemons, barrel staves, a dead dog, hunks of bread. Gordon walked along the embankment to Westminster. The wind made the plane trees rattle. Sharply the menacing wind sweeps over. He winced. That tripe again! Even now, though it was December, a few poor, draggled old wrecks were settling down on the benches, tucking themselves up in sort of parcels of newspaper. Gordon looked at them callously. On the bum, they called it. He would come to it himself some day. Better so, perhaps. He never felt any pity for the genuine poor. It is the black-coated poor, the middle class, who need pitying. He walked up to Trafalgar Square. Hours and hours to kill. The National Gallery. Shut long ago, of course. It would be. It was 7:15. 3, 4, 5 hours before he could sleep. He walked 7 times round the square, slowly. 4 times clockwise, 3 times widdershins. His feet were sore and most of the benches were empty, but he would not sit down. If he halted for an instant, the longing for tobacco would come upon him. In the Charing Cross Road, the tea shops called like sirens. Once the glass door of a Lyons swung open, letting out a wave of hot cake, scented air. It almost overcame him. After all, why not go in? You could sit there for nearly an hour. A cup of tea 2p, 2 buns a penny each. He had 4p halfpenny, counting the Joey.
But no, that bloody Joey!
The girl at the cash desk would titter. In a vivid vision, he saw the girl at the cash desk, as she handled his 3p bit, grin sidelong at the girl behind the cake counter. They'd know it was your last 3p. No use. Shove on. Keep moving. In the deadly glare of the neon lights, the pavements were densely crowded. Gordon threaded his way, a small shabby figure, with pale face and unkempt hair. The crowd slid past him. He avoided and was avoided. There is something horrible about London at night, the coldness, the anonymity, the aloofness. 7 million people, sliding to and fro, avoiding contact, barely aware of one another's existence, like fish in an aquarium tank. The street swarmed with pretty girls. By scores they streamed past him, their faces averted or unseeing, cold nymph, creatures dreading the eyes of the male. It was queer how many of them seemed to be alone, or with another girl. Far more women alone than women with men, he noted. That too was money. How many girls alive wouldn't be manless sooner than take a man who's moneyless? The pubs were open, oozing sour whiffs of beer. People were trickling by 1s and 2s into the picture houses. Gordon halted outside a great garish picture house under the wary eye of the commissionaire to examine the photographs. Greta Garbo in the painted veil. He yearned to go inside, not for Greta's sake, but just for the warmth and the softness of the velvet seat. He hated the pictures, of course. Seldom went there even when he could afford it. Why encourage the art that is destined to replace literature? But still, there is a kind of soggy attraction about it. To sit on the padded seat in the warm smoke, scented darkness, letting the flickering drivel on the screen gradually overwhelm you, feeling the waves of its silliness lap you round till you seem to drown, intoxicated, in a viscous sea. After all, it's the kind of drug we need, the right drug for friendless people. As he approached the Palace Theatre, a tartan sentry, "Go under the porch," marked him down, stepped forward, and stood in his path, a short, stocky Italian girl, very young, with big black eyes. She looked agreeable, and, what tarts so seldom are merry? For a moment he checked his step, even allowing himself to catch her eye. She looked up at him, ready to break out into a broad-lipped smile. Why not stop and talk to her? She looked as though she might understand him.
But no money!
He looked away and sighed, stepped her with the cold haste of a man whom poverty makes virtuous. How furious she'd be if he stopped, and then she found he had no money. He pressed on. Even to talk costs money. Up Tottenham Court Road and Camden Road it was a dreary drudge. He walked slower, dragging his feet a little. He had done 10 miles over pavements. More girls streamed past, unseeing. Girls alone, girls with youths, girls with other girls, girls alone. Their cruel youthful eyes went over him and through him as though he had not existed. He was too tired to resent it. His shoulders surrendered to their wariness. He slouched, not trying any longer to preserve his upright carriage and his be damned air. They flee from me, that someone did me seek. How could you blame them? He was 30, moth-eaten, and without charm. Why should any girl ever look at him again? He reflected that he must go home at once if he wanted any food, for Ma Wisbeach refused to serve meals after 9 o'clock. But the thought of his cold, womanless bedroom sickened him. To climb the stairs, light the gas, flop down at the table with hours to kill, and nothing to do, nothing to read, nothing to smoke, no, not endurable. In Camden Town the pubs were full and noisy. Though this was only Thursday, 3 women, red-armed, squat as the beer mugs in their hands, stood outside a pub door, talking. From within came hoarse voices, fag smoke, the fume of beer. Gordon thought of the Crichton Arms. Flaxmen might be there. Why not risk it? A half of bitter, 3p halfpenny. He had 4p halfpenny counting the joey. After all, a joey is legal tender. He felt dreadfully thirsty already. It had been a mistake to let himself think of beer. As he approached the Crichton, he heard voices singing. The great garish pub seemed to be more brightly lighted than usual. There was a concert of something going on inside. 20 ripe male voices were chanting in unison fo, or Riza Jaragu, fellow, for Riza Jaragu fellow, for Riza Jaragu fi elk and tori ori us. At least, that was what it sounded like. Gordon drew nearer, pierced by a ravishing thirst. The voices were so soggy, so infinitely beery. When you heard them, you saw the scarlet faces of prosperous plumbers. There was a private room behind the bar where the buffaloes held their secret conclaves. Doubtless it was they who were singing. They were giving some kind of commemorative booze to their president, secretary, grand herbivore, or whatever he is called. Gordon hesitated outside the saloon bar. Better to go to the public bar, perhaps. Draught beer in the public, bottled beer in the saloon. He went round to the other side of the pub. The beer-choked voices followed him with a tori orie. And a tori orie! For Riza Jaragu fellow. For Riza Jaragu fellow. He felt quite faint for a moment. But it was fatigue and hunger as well as thirst. He could picture the cozy room where those buffaloes were singing, the roaring fire, the big shiny table, the bovine photographs on the wall. Could picture also, as the singing ceased, 20 scarlet faces disappearing into pots of beer. He put his hand into his pocket and made sure that the 3p bit was still there. After all, why not? In the public bar, who would comment? Slap the joey down on the bar and pass it off as a joke. Been saving that up from the Christmas pudding. Ha, ha, laughter all round. Already he seemed to have the metallic taste of draught beer on his tongue. He fingered the tiny disc, irresolute. The buffaloes had tuned up again with a tori orie and a tori orie, a fa, or Riz, a jarigu, fellow. The Gordon moved back to the saloon bar. The window was frosted and also steamy from the heat inside. Still, there were chinks where you could see through. He peeped in. Yes, Flaxman was there. The saloon bar was crowded. Like all rooms seen from the outside, it looked ineffably cozy. The fire that blazed in the grate danced, mirrored in the brass spittoons. Gordon thought he could almost smell the beer through the glass. Flaxman was propping up the bar with 2 fish-faced pals who looked like insurance, touts of the better type. One elbow on the bar, his foot on the rail, a beer-streaked glass in the other hand. He was swapping backchat with the blonde cutie barmaid. She was standing on a chair behind the bar, ranging the bottled beer and talking saucily over her shoulder. You couldn't hear what they were saying, but you could guess. Flaxman let fall some memorable witticism. The fish-faced men bellowed with obscene laughter, and the blonde cutie, tittering down at him, half shocked and half delighted, wriggled her neat little bum. Gordon's heart sickened. To be in there, just to be in there, in the warmth and light, with people to talk to, with beer and cigarettes and a girl to flirt with. After all, why not go in? You could borrow a bob off Flaxman. Flaxman would lend it to you all right. He pictured Flaxman's careless assent. What ho? Chappie, how's life?
What a bub. Sure. Take 2. Catch, Chappie!
And the florin flicked along the beer-wet bar. Flaxman was a decent sort in his way. Gordon put his hand against the swing door. He even pushed it open a few inches. The warm fog of smoke and beer slipped through the crack. A familiar, reviving smell. Nevertheless, as he smelled it, his nerve failed him. No, impossible to go in. He turned away. He couldn't go shoving in that saloon bar with only 4p halfpenny in his pocket.
Never let other people buy your drinks for you.
The first commandment of the moneyless. He made off down the dark pavement. For Riza Jaragu,
Fi el and tori ori us, with a tori ori I.
And oh, the voices, diminishing with distance, rolled after him. bearing faint tidings of beer. Gordon took the threepenny, bit from his pocket, and sent it skimming away into the darkness. He was going home, if you could call it going. At any rate, he was gravitating in that direction. He did not want to go home, but he had got to sit down. His legs ached and his feet were bruised. And that vile bedroom was the sole place in London where he had purchased the right to sit down. He slipped in quietly, but, as usual, not quite so quietly that Mrs. Wisbech failed to hear him. She gave him a brief nosy glance round the corner of her door. It would be a little after 9. She might get him a meal if he asked her. But she would grizzle and make a favor of it, and he would go to bed hungry sooner than face that. He started up the stairs. He was halfway up the first flight when a double knock behind made him jump.
The post. Perhaps a letter from Rosemary.
The forced from outside, the letter flap lifted, and with an effort, like a heron regurgitating a flatfish, vomited a bunch of letters onto the mat. Gordon's heart bounded. There were 6 or 7 of them. Surely among all that lot there must be one for himself. Mrs. Wisbech, as usual, had darted from her lair at the sound of the postman's knock. As a matter of fact, in 2 years Gordon had never once succeeded in getting hold of a letter before Mrs. Wisbech laid hands on it. She gathered the letters jealously to her breast, and then, holding them up one at a time, scanned their addresses. From her manner you could gather that she suspected each one of them of containing a writ, an improper love letter, or an ad for Amen pills. "One for you, Mr. Comstock," she said sorely, handing him a letter. His heart shrank and paused in its beat. A long-shaped envelope. Not from Rosemary, therefore. Ah, it was addressed in his own handwriting, from the editor of a paper. Then he had 2 poems out at present. One with the Californian Review, the other with the Primrose Quarterly. But this wasn't an American stamp, and the Primrose had had his poem at least 6 weeks. Good God, supposing they'd accepted it. He had forgotten Rosemary's existence. He said thanks, stuck the letter in his pocket, and started up the stairs with outward calm. But no sooner was he out of Mrs. Wisbech's sight that he bounded up 3 steps at a time. He had got to be alone to open that letter. Even before he reached the door, he was feeling for his matchbox. But his fingers were trembling so that in lighting the gas he chipped the mantel. He sat down, took the letter from his pocket, and then quailed. For a moment he could not nerve himself to open it. He held it up to the light and felt it to see how thick it was. His poem had been 2 sheets. Then, calling himself a fool, he ripped the envelope open. Out tumbled his own poem, and with it a neat, oh so neat, little printed slip of imitation parchment. The editor regrets that he is unable to make use of the enclosed contribution. The slip was decorated with a design of funereal laurel leaves. Gordon gazed at the thing with wordless hatred. Perhaps no snub in the world is so deadly as this, because none is so unanswerable. Suddenly he loathed his own poem and was acutely ashamed of it. He felt it the weakest, silliest poem ever written. Without looking at it again, he tore it into small bits and flung them into the waste-paper basket. He would put that poem out of his mind forever. The rejection slip, however, he did not tear up yet. He fingered it, feeling its loathly sleekness. Such an elegant little thing, printed in admirable type. You could tell at a glance that it came from a good magazine, a snooty highbrow magazine with the money of a publishing house behind it.
Money, money! Money and culture!
It was a stupid thing that he had done. Fancy sending a poem to a paper like the Primrose, as though they'd accept poems from people like him. The mere fact that the poem wasn't typed would tell them what kind of person he was. He might as well have dropped a card on Buckingham Palace. He thought of the people who wrote for the Primrose, a coterie of moneyed highbrows, those sleek, refined young animals who suck in money and culture with their mother's milk. The idea of trying to horn in among that pansy crowd, but he cursed them all the same.
The sods! The bloody sods!
The editor regrets. Why be so bloody mealy-mouthed about it? Why not say outright, we don't want your bloody poems. We only take poems from chaps we were at Cambridge with. You proletarians keep your distance. The bloody, hypocritical sods, At last he crumpled up the rejection slip, threw it away, and stood up. Better get to bed while he had the energy to undress. Bed was the only place that was warm. But wait, wind the clock, set the alarm. He went through the familiar action with a sense of deadly staleness. His eye fell upon the Aspidistra. 2 years he had inhabited this vile room, 2 mortal years in which nothing had been accomplished. 700 wasted days, all ending in the lonely bed. Snubs, failures, insults, all of them unavenged. Money, money, all is money. Because he had no money, the Dorings snubbed him. Because he had no money, the Primrose had turned down his poem. Because he had no money, Rosemary wouldn't sleep with him. Social failure, artistic failure, sexual failure, they are all the same. And lack of money is at the bottom of them all. He must hit back at somebody or something. He could not go to bed with that rejection slip as the last thing in his mind. He thought of Rosemary. It was 5 days now since she had written. If there had been a letter from her this evening, even that rap over the knuckles from the Primrose Quarterly would have mattered less. She declared that she loved him, and she wouldn't sleep with him, wouldn't even write to him. She was the same as all the others. She despised him and forgot about him because he had no money and therefore didn't matter. He would write her an enormous letter, telling her what it felt like to be ignored and insulted, making her see how cruelly she had treated him. He found a clean sheet of paper and wrote in the top right, hand corner 31 Willowbed Road. No, 1 December, 9:30 p.m. But having written that much, he found that he could write no more. He was in the defeated mood when even the writing of a letter is too great an effort. Besides, what was the use? She would never understand. No woman ever understands. But he must write something, something to wound her. That was what he most wanted. At this moment, he meditated for a long time and at last wrote, exactly in the middle of the sheet, "You have broken my heart." No address, no signature. Rather neat it looked, all by itself, there in the middle of the sheet, in his small scholarly handwriting, almost like a little poem in itself. This thought cheered him up a little. He stuck the letter in an envelope and went out and posted it at the post office on the corner, spending his last 3 halfpence on a penny stamp and a halfpenny stamp out of the slot machine.